Welcome to Sex and Mental Health, a mini-series from victims and villains. Throughout the course of these episodes, we're going to look at the good, the bad, the pleasure, the disdain, and everything in between when we talk about the intersections between sex and mental health. Now, during our inaugural episode, I had a chance to sit down with Richmond's very own Kanya Ford, MS, aka Coach K, as she will be referred to throughout the course of this episode. She is an accomplished life coach, mother, wife, and certified sexologist. In this episode, we speak about the importance of communication, consent, boundaries, fantasies, and much more. For more information about Coach K, she can be found at loveandintimacy101.com. We'll provide you guys a link in the show notes below wherever you guys are currently watching or listening from this. But without further ado, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Sex and Mental Health.
How are you doing today?
I am doing amazing, and thank you for having me. How about yourself?
I am well. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you. Sex and mental health has become a passion of mine, and I am kind of curious before we kind of dig in to really start talking about the importance of the topics that we're going to be talking about, but specifically, what is it? What is Love and Intimacy 101? Can you tell us a little bit more about the business for those that may be here in Richmond?
Absolutely. So Love and Intimacy 101, when I thought about the name, I had to have the 101 because when we all go to school, 101 are always the core courses, the 100 courses. And so for Love and Intimacy 101, it's all about getting back to the basics. So in my coaching practice, where I'm a life coach and a clinical sexologist, I work with women and I also work with couples and growing intimacy with yourself so that you can start to invite people into your space on purpose for a more fulfilled just relationships and sex life as well. So I do that through one-on-one coaching. I have classes, workshops. I have a book that I wrote. So it's all kinds of fun things for the folks.
What is the difference, if you don't mind my asking, between a sexologist and a sex counselor? I'm just kind of curious. Is there a difference between the two?
Not necessarily. I don't like to use the traditional terms like sex therapist or sex counselor, only because I didn't specifically go and get like a BA in psychology or something like that. I did my certification as a sexologist, which is the study of the behaviors and actions around. So technically, yes, I am a sex counselor because I do counsel people. But I like to stay away from some of the terms because I don't want to offend folks who have gone through like state licensing to get what they have. So I'm always mindful of that.
Makes sense. And one of the things that I'm always fascinated by about particularly people in your field is what drove them to really seek out pursuing that career. I feel like usually from interviews I've read about people that have sought out careers much like yours were, kind of went through like a weird bullying phase in like middle school, high school, and specifically because they were kind of curious about the inner workings of, sexual organs or sexual desires. But what was it for you that really kind of brought you into this field?
The first thing is I am naturally nosy. I am what I could say fourth generation nosy. Like it comes down. So I initially went into human resources. So I've been a human resources professional for over 15 years. And what I found is when people came into the HR office, it was less about the job and it was more about what was happening relationship wise. And also as a child, yes, I've been through plenty of the traditional 80s, 90s, and early 2000s foolishness that a lot of women go through, assault, not even all the time active assaults, but just the passive way that we were groomed to accept certain behaviors at a young age. And so, yes, that that clicked in my head. Like, I want to know what makes people tick. Like, I'm going to sit down and watch a porn, and I'm going to try to figure out, well, what are they thinking? Well, what caused them to do this thing? I'm not watching here for the entertainment.
I'm kind of curious if we can back up just a little bit to where you're talking about like being groomed essentially, or the foolish, as you put it, the foolish behaviors of being assaulted. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more, just terminology wise, so we have a better understanding of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So growing up, I would say I was in middle school in the early 90s, like 92-ish, 93, high school 94 through 97-ish. And so it was acceptable for the ninth grader to be picked up by the guy who graduated high school, 2 years prior. So that's a 19-year-old that's coming to pick up a 14 or 15-year-old. And when the different videos that we watch, it was okay. And it wasn't a big deal because most of the times we weren't being forced into sex or forced into relationships. It was something that we felt, okay, we can handle this. We're mature enough. A lot of us in the 90s were latchkey kids. Our parents worked. And so we came home and we had to just figure out what to do with our time. So if there were older influences, it's like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And then you're 12, 13, and 14, getting yourself into adult situations that you don't know how to really get out of. And no doesn't come to mind because it's like, well, I want this person to like me, but I also don't want to do this thing. I should just go with it.
Sure.
And so that was a lot of what was happening in my growth.
Well, that's really interesting to kind of also talk about in consideration of, one of the things that happened in the early 2000s. It's, the story got made into a movie a few years back called Spotlight, and the entirety was kind of exposing the Vatican for, years of essentially grooming young boys into basically thinking sexual assault was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, now it's really interesting to kind of see stories like that from in a post Me Too movement world where these conversations are starting to be normalized a lot more now. So the bulk of what we're going to be talking about here today is going to be the importance of communication, whether that is everything from, the casual hookup to, being in a committed relationship, being married, and I would even dare say, talking about the importance of consent as well. So I guess like jumping into that topic of conversation, why is it so important to have those conversations and to set boundaries early on in the relationship, even if it is a casual hookup?
Oh, it's so important because time and assumptions both grow rapidly when we're in mutual spaces together. A casual hookup may feel like, oh, we're just gonna meet this one time. In my mind, I may know exactly what I want to happen, but if I don't vocalize that to the person who I just met, who I don't know from anywhere, what they may have in their mind is something totally different. So being able to, if you all go out to dinner first, be very clear, these are my boundaries. These are the things that I'm willing to do versus not. And outside of that, being okay with not getting into that situation, because essentially it's no one's fault to be placed into a predicament where you can say no, but the other party doesn't listen.
Yeah.
You can still state those boundaries. I'm not looking to have sex whatsoever. I'm okay with maybe kissing, holding hands. I'll even go back to your place to have wine, but I want to be clear. I'm not looking to have sex. You can say this, but in someone else's mind who we don't know from anywhere. And that could be a future husband because we don't know them when we first meet them.
Sure.
They may have grown up in an environment where, well, if a girl comes to the room and we're kissing, then I can just keep going because that's my consent, when in actuality, the consent was not expressly given or openly given to go further than this mode of kissing.
We talked about growing up in the 90s, and in the 90s particularly, it always kind of seemed like consent was this like unwritten rule. I don't think I was in my adulthood before I'd actually heard the word consent. Like I knew about like things like rape and sexual assault, but I had never heard the terminology of consent and or heard it used in a sentence or in context. And so you have a lot of these stories that come out that have, you know, horror stories from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and we're still hearing them where you're having people, because there's not that initial consent conversation that's taking place, you are having these expectations that are either ending in heartbreak, rape, or even in some degrees suicide. And so at what point in the relationship should should the subject of consent be brought up, in your professional opinion?
Honestly, in my professional opinion, consent should be brought up within the first date. And it may seem scary to some people, like, I don't want to discuss that because I'm not thinking about that. But again, we have to start being clear about our intentions, what we want, what we're willing to do versus not. Because you're right, consent is like this new age world. It's just like a whole bunch of new age stuff is coming to play. I was fortunate enough to have a middle school teacher who, that's where I learned a lot of my boundaries from. And of course, you know, they pulled sex education out of schools quickly. And most of the time it was, you know, a week of PE. You had 1 week of that sexual education where it's basically, here's a penis, here's a vagina, don't get pregnant, use condoms, abstinence. And that was kind of the baseline of what we were getting. Nothing really in between. So we fumbled through that. So yes, the whole consent conversation is essentially new. And I thank SVU, you know, Law and Order, for even bringing it more to the forefront of this new age world. Word of consent. And it's super important as early as the first date to talk about. It doesn't have to be in depth, but just to ask, what do you know about consent? What do you think about consent? You can just ask the question without having the full-blown conversation, so that you have a good idea and context about who you're dealing with.
Consent is such a scary word to talk about as well. It's such a scary conversation. It feels almost like you're proposing to the other person, because it's an intimidating word, because, you know, what happens if they shut you down? What happens if their expectations are differently than yours? What are some ways that you would suggest kind of bringing up consent in a clear but effective way?
Because I'm super direct, I would just literally just ask the question, hey, you know. But for someone who's a little more shy, I always like to say, give the power away and just play dumb. You know, I was watching a TV show before I came to this dinner with you, and, you know, something like Dateline or something. And they brought up, you know, consent. And I know that, you know, when I was growing up, consent wasn't a thing. What about with you?
Sure.
So now at that point, I'm opening up conversation where I'm curious. And you can just see how far the other party goes into it. Either they lean into that conversation, oh, you know, that's a good thing, I've never really thought about it, let's talk about it. Or do they immediately run away from it? So maybe I don't go as far into the consent conversation that day, and we end our date at the restaurant, and we don't go any place where, you know, anyone's home. And maybe we talk about it further on another date, or even over the phone or something.
I can't personally speak to where we're at now with sexual education in schools. I have to live vicariously through nieces and nephews that aren't quite old enough to get in there yet. But one of the things that you're right, like that was kind of my sexual education experience. We had a week when you hit puberty, or right around the age where you're projected to hit puberty, you have, this is the changes that your body's going to go through. This is the penis, this is the vagina, like you said, like, abstinence, don't have sex. If you have sex, here's pull outs, wear a condom, stuff like that. And a lot of my generation, a lot of the generation that is coming up is learning their own sexual education from outlets like porn or romance novels, or a number of other things. And some of the things that in particular that I've come across with porn is that everything is fantasy based, so there is no kind of consent. What are some of the dangers of learning communication from something like porn or romance novels?
Ooh, it is, like you said, it is such a fantasy fueled thing, because what we fail to realize, or young people fail to realize, is these are people who are paid to make the reader or the person that's watching feel a certain way.
Sure.
And so if that's all the education, because mom and dad, we don't talk about that, because if we don't talk about it, it doesn't happen in some worlds, right? So learning from that is super dangerous, because then we get with a person, a live person, and we immediately go to, oh, well, I know that if I'm kissing on the neck, next step is this, because that's what I've seen. Or if I've been reading this romance novel, that if I get this embraceful hug, then he must be a gentleman, and I have no issue with going to his home because he would never do anything harmful. So it can set a false sense of reality for majority of people that then can turn into embarrassment, which can then show up as anger. And that's where I think some people get in trouble with the timeline of events, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to something we were talking about previously with consent, another issue specifically with porn is that some of the scenes in which you have, like, a guy comes onto a girl, a lot of these like beginning interactions can almost borderline very rapey behavior.
Yes.
And, it's this fantasy that a girl's just going to be okay with it, that their body's instantly acclimated to, take a throbbing penis, and that's not always the case. And so that goes back to this idea of deconstructing the fantasy also means deconstructing and being open and understanding that it is just that, fantasy.
Yeah. And understanding that our bodies react, because I know I've seen a court case where it probably was on SVU. And, the guy was like, oh, well, she wanted it because she was moist, or she was wet, or she orgasmed. Not understanding that our bodies don't always, our brain, our bodies, our parts don't
Sure.
always align. And what our bodies are naturally made to do, because we as females, because we're so amazing, we do have that organ that is strictly for pleasure. And so does the body understand when it's being touched and fueled through consensual touching or pleasure, or forceful? It can't always determine that. It just knows that I'm here to make sure that the owner of this body receives pleasure. And once somebody taps or touches, it's like, okay, this is my time to shine. And it just performs. Because all bodies are different. Some lock up and just, there's no way, because the mind is super connected to the body. But someone with a disconnected mind and body, which goes back to just the sex and mental health piece, they're not always aligned. And that's a scary thing as well, because a woman who orgasms does not always want to have that interaction. And that's same with a guy, because we can't leave our men out of the equation. Just because a man's body, which is naturally, if you rub against them or certain things that may trigger them to have an erection, that doesn't mean that at 12, the 20-year-old babysitter that stimulated him, that doesn't mean that's what he wanted. His body may have reacted, because that's what the body does. Oh, it's my time to perform. Let me perform.
It brings into this conversation of communication. And so that, whether it be male or be female, is there a way that there can be like that internal dialogue to where the brain catches up with the body and vice versa?
It comes with really being in tune with yourself, but in some very uncontrollable situations. Of course, we have fire drills, we have tornado drills, but when your house catches on fire, do you really stop and say, okay, I'm going to get the fire extinguisher, I'm going to get everybody in the hallway, we're going to line up right here, we're going to go out? When that actual fire is happening, some steps do get skipped. And it really determines on how much do we practice. A firefighter has to be so on point with what they do when they go into a fire that they do follow these steps directly, just like with a dispatcher with the ambulance. So a person who truly practices their mental health and connection to body on a consistent basis is more likely to be able to have more control over how the body reacts than not. But again, because all bodies are different, there could be some slip through, but it's that practice with self. And that's why I'm big on intimacy with yourself.
That's a really spectacular way to put that. I love that example of the fire drill and versus the real life fire. But are you talking about specifically about all bodies being different? We live, it seems like now in the age of Tinder, specifically, that goes back to the importance of defining the relationship, defining the consent, particularly because what worked for one partner may not work well for another. And also kind of having that all bodies are different, everybody is different, really. Some drives are higher than others. One of the things that you brought up, I'm kind of curious about it, is the that inner dialogue between self and knowing yourself. Specifically, just even taking another party out of that equation, how important is it to understand your own self pleasure and your own boundaries before bringing someone else in?
It is top tier important and extremely valuable to understand how your body is pleasured prior to allowing another person to be involved. Because if you don't know how to please you, then there's no way you can truly tell someone or allow someone to just kind of fumble through without you getting frustrated on what pleases you. Like, some people love oral sex. If you know that that's not something that you enjoy, then it's perfectly okay to say, I don't mind that as foreplay that we engage in oral sex. However, I know that it's something that doesn't heighten my stimulation.
Sure.
The mind connection that you may have with the partner that's doing it will absolutely relax you enough that it seems like an enjoyable act. But you can say, after a couple minutes, if you're down there too long, then it just turns me off. So if I know that does not please me, it's my obligation to share that with my partner. But if I know that just rubbing the small of my back consistently while talking in my ear, if that's something that really heightens me and it's something I enjoy, then that's something that I'm definitely obligated to share with my partner, because I need to give them the opportunity to know the spots, my erogenous zones, that really trigger me to say, let's go, versus those that really just shut me down.
And it goes back to something we were talking about earlier on the podcast about sexual education. At what point, specifically, would you advise for that sexual exploration to begin? And are there resources out there that would be valuable that are not necessarily pornographic?
So, and I'll start with a big scope. I do
Mhm.
believe that age appropriate sexuality conversations should start as early as 5. And here's why. Actually, it should be age appropriate 3, because that's when they start to go to daycare. And what that looks like is just boundaries, understanding what the parts of the child's body is and what parts should not be handled or touched by anyone,
Mm.
including a teacher. And so we don't think about that when we start saying, well, I'm just going to wait until the child gets into high school before I start talking. No, because we send them into strangers' places as early as 3 to be cared for. And so them understanding that this is mine, I recommend using real words, vagina or penis, not pocketbooks and stick and noo-noos and nook-nooks. To each their own, and I get that.
Sure.
But I know for a fact that there was a young girl who was being molested because she kept coming back and saying that this guy, I can't think of, like a janitor or something, kept going into her pocketbook. Well, the mom didn't think her vagina, even though that's the word that she gave this 4-year-old, that's your pocketbook. No one should go in your pocketbook. So the 4-year-old is like, I'm telling you that this guy is touching my pocketbook. Mom's thinking about a real purse. So if we can have, that's an age appropriate conversation, is to let the children know what their actual anatomy parts are, not drill it into them. You shouldn't be doing this every day, but starting at 3 to 5 years old, have that. Then we go into pre-K kindergarten through 5th grade. That's when the conversations get more in depth. You're going to start feeling these things. When you look at so-and-so, you're going to start feeling these things. When you're in a tub, you may even touch yourself. Now, you don't want to say necessarily, hey, I want you to come and tell me bit by bit what was going on in that tub, but it should not be a parent's job to shame a child who is exploring their body. We should not look for them to go out and look for pleasure necessarily while you're sitting in middle school or elementary school. So that's where the balance comes in. And I think for most parents, they just choose to say, well, I just don't want to step in it at all because
Sure.
it's just too much work to figure out what I should say versus not.
Yeah, that's and that's the tough thing that I guess it's like that tough boundary, especially, but again, it's that open dialogue, it's that open communication. So, once we've kind of established that at some point you've gone through the years of figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. We're going to talk about this in a future episode, but at what point is it or I mean, would it be a case by case basis to even introduce the subjects of things like vibrators, butt plugs, stuff along those lines?
So I remember that post that was going around where a lady was like, hey, my 14-year-old asked me about a vibrator, so I'm going to help her pick one out. And people just bashed this parent till the blood was rushed out of her head. Like they just went in. And I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. Because if that 14-year-old had enough sense to come to mom or dad to say, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I think I want to try, because they learned something somewhere outside of that house. But instead of continuing the path outside of the house, they brought it back in. So do we encourage this at 14? I think having a mature educational talk around vibrators and masturbation, I think having a more educated conversation about it is more helpful than avoiding it and saying, just don't do that. That's disgusting. Because trust and believe me, at 14, they're going to figure out a way. That means, hey, let me click on this porn site or let me go to this website and figure out how to use it, what to do. which again is going to give them that false reality. So it is a maturity by maturity basis, honestly, because there could be a 10-year-old who's more mature than an 18-year-old, and that's just the reality.
Sure.
But start with the educational piece first, which also opens up the line of communication, because now that they got that, they're going to come back to you for more.
I want to like jump ahead just a little bit in terms of like age and maturity here. When I'm looking at your sign behind you, and I'm just kind of curious, like, how would you define the difference, I guess, between sex and intimacy? You know, pardon my language, but you know, how would you define a difference between, you know, fucking and making love?
So sex is a form of intimacy, but sex is not the only form. So that's the difference between, which I think because we use sex and intimacy so interchangeable, that people swear up and down that when you say intimacy, that sex is it. When in reality, the first form of intimacy that majority of us had was when we were laid on our mother's chest after we were born. That was your first intimate moment. You had skin to skin contact with another human being. For twins, they have intimate moments in the womb with each other. They create a language. They create a different tapping sound. They also have that inside the womb with mom. And so sex is truly, sexual intercourse is sex. Sex is oral sex, oral intercourse. Sex is hand jobs. Sex is a physical act of activity in the hopes of gaining a certain pleasure on the tail end. Intimacy is the closeness that we yearn to feel with another party. So sex is absolutely a big part of intimacy, because some people's love language is sex, and that's a real reality that we have to come to terms with. Some people can be completely calmed. Why? Because the womb is where we was the last safest place in the world. And it goes over some folks' heads, because when you think of sex and you think of the womb, you just think of a vagina, and that's it. That's what we seek pleasure from. But there's an organ in there for pleasure, but the actual womb itself is a calming place. So fucking and making love. Fucking is like, hey, I got some minutes. I want to get it in. I want to get it out. Like, as a married couple, you go through that. Hey, I got 2 minutes for you tonight. Let's get it in. I don't have time for the moving and grooving and shaking. Love making is truly pouring yourself into your partner and allowing them to do the same. It can be an hour-long session, and sex is only 10 minutes of that hour of lovemaking.
Is there actually like a, you know, like let's say in the case of a married couple that has, you know, they're both busy full time, they, you know, their parents, kids got full-time careers, you know, in sports, theater, ballet, you know, you name it, whatever activity you want to put there, they're busy. And so, you know, sex is something that is very hard to do, but sex is still something that they are prioritizing. And so it's not quite the love making, but it gets in that, you know, that quickie, or that, you know, like 5 minutes here, I got, you know, quick shower sex, you know, something along those lines. Is there an actual, like, in that context, is there an actual difference between fucking and making love for that couple, or for people that are in those created within those spaces?
Yes and no, because between couples, me and my husband married, it'll be 18 years this year, and we absolutely get some fucking sessions in. Like, hey, we just got to get this thing in. And even when because a fucking session could be 30 minutes and a love making could be 20. So the time is not necessarily, it's the engaging that's happening within. So one thing that me and my husband has done for going on 20 years is we've always showered together. So if we're going to be in the shower, we may not have 5 or 10 minutes, because we're supposed to be washing. And we have 5 kids. So we've had kids all throughout the house at all times. Can we have a making session in 5 minutes within that shower? Absolutely. Because it comes with the passion of the kiss, the holding, the touching. Hey, I'm going to wash your back first. So it comes with all of the activities that surrounds it.
It's the very intentionality of the act. Conversation switching from married couples to, either just dating or casual hookups. Is it actually possible to experience the intimacy within those contexts, or is that something that is gained further on down the line?
Actually, you can have meaningful hookups, if that makes sense. So
Interesting.
if we think about I don't even know what they used to call them back in my day, but I call them like touch buddies, cuddle buddies, side pieces. Sometimes, and it could be a married person that steps out, and I'm not encouraging this in any way. But many times it's not just the physical act of sex that they're stepping out for. It's the intimacy that they were missing within their own relationship that they don't know how to get. Well, they're not willing to figure out how to get there. But I can go over here. I can just have someone rub my head. I can have somebody just talk to me. We absolutely can have sex. We may even lay there for a little while afterwards. And I don't have to do anything else with them. It was just in that moment that I needed to feel safe. I needed to have sex. And then I go back home to my home place. So that's a casual hookup that it's meaningful while it's happening.
That's a great jumping off point to what is because it just kind of seems like once life gets in the way, to go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, it seems like we allow sex to not be a priority anymore, or intimacy to die, or we stop having these conversations as life goes on. And so within a relationship, whether it is, someone that has been married 5 years or has only been dating 5 days or 5 weeks, how important is communication to be a constant, to be the foundation of your relationship?
It's a must. Communication will absolutely make or break any relationship that you ever get in, from the first time that you meet to 20 years down the line. One misstep in communication could destroy 20 years of a friendship. So imagine what it can do in an actual romantic relationship that you've been thriving in, but you decided, oh, well, she sees that I'm busy, so she should understand why I didn't, pick up anything more for the anniversary that's coming up, or why I didn't call to say, hey, how's your day? We assume that when we've been with someone for a while that they just know, when in reality, it's the furthest thing from the truth. Because as much as you've been together, even in that 5 days, okay, I know they go to work at this time. I know they get off at this time. I know they have a dog and this is where they live. Outside of that, in fact, we don't know anything else. So unless we communicate, hey, what time do you like to eat dinner? Do you enjoy getting texts throughout the day? I'm not big on calling, so I may text you more. Me being able to say that to someone that I just met will help to not cause a confusion when they don't hear from me for 3 days, when they kept calling, but, oh, they know I'm busy. Oh, that's right. She told me she doesn't like to text. So when she calls, I need to pick up to be able to say, hey, I'm in the middle of a meeting. I won't be out until X, Y, and Z. Is it okay just for today if we text? Just that simple communication could create a sturdy bridge to a future.
One of the things that, going back to the subject of sex and the importance of communication within there, sometimes you definitely have people that are going to have two different drives. Sometimes there are people that are going to have very high sex drives matched with someone that has very high sex drives. I think also too, not only with the importance of communicating effectively about what you like and what you don't like. Also having that conversation of, what the drives look like, but also at the same time, like, what are your sexual fantasies? How important is something like a sexual fantasy conversation when it comes to a lasting relationship or even great sex?
It's huge. One of the activities that I do at our annual couples retreat is about fantasies, and it's a yes, no, maybe list.
Mm.
And they each list out 20 things that I think it's 10 that they've always wanted to do or try, but they were too afraid to bring it up. And from that list, they each will decide, hey, that's a yes, because they don't know what the other person was thinking. And it could be like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to try sex in the woods. So we definitely have to do that's in the yes pile. A hard no could be anal sex. Nope, never wanted to try it. Or it could be a maybe to add a third person into it. So having that yes, no, maybe list and having those fantasy conversations, they're necessary, because otherwise we box ourselves into corners, and the other party feels like, oh, this person's not adventurous, and then you're also feeling like, well, that person's not adventurous. They just want to do sex on Monday night, eat dinner, go to sleep. Sex on Tuesday night, eat dinner, go to sleep, and then you get bored simply because you didn't express, hey, I want to try the backyard in a tent, something as simple as that.
So to kind of also prevent sex life from being quote unquote boring, like that conversation, that dialogue is something that needs to be continuously existing, because sex is something that should be conversated just about every day. How important is that, especially in a ongoing, whether that's a marriage or a relationship that's just starting? Sex, how often should sex be conversated?
That will go back to the individual folks and the couples, because I will say this. I always ask people, what are your top three? What are your top three things of importance in a relationship? Usually it's sex, money, and communication. Those are the top three. So if you know that sex is in your top three, but not in your partner's top three, you still have to have that communication, because if it's not in your partner's top three, it is less likely to come up, which means that it is more easily put on the back burner. But you know that that's important for you to have a relationship. So figuring out a way to talk around it. It doesn't have to always be, when can I get some? You gonna give me some tonight? You gonna bend over for me? It doesn't have to be that. And I will say that me and my husband are the same way. We do have that continual fluid conversation. Even after 20 years, you have to be able to continuously talk about it. We could be joking around. We could be cooking. I haven't had none in a long time. And my husband might say, 2 days. It's like, I just paying attention to see if you were. I'm just if you're paying attention. It could be banter back and forth like that. So it doesn't always have to be so intense. Like you said, it could just be in jest.
Yeah, one of the things that you talked about earlier with, sexual fantasies, but also like introducing like new elements into a sex life that may spice it up or, kind of reanimate it, so to say. How would, what would be some practical ways to, address that? Especially if someone may not be into the idea of, being tied up or anal sex, some things that we would classify outside of the vanilla category.
That comes with the yes, no, maybe list. I think that those are super cool and they should be done often, every 3 to 6 months, maybe. Hey, let's revisit our list. Let's see what we haven't done. We have bucket lists all the time. These are the things I want to do before I die. Why not create a sex bucket list between you? Which means that we're going to visit this on a frequent basis, because we married till death do us part. So we have all of these years, and just set that rule up front. It may be a no today at 25, But who knows how you're going to feel at 45?
Yeah.
What happens is we build trust bonds and intimacy bonds with each other over time. And where you were a little bit like, I don't really know you like that to really do this thing, even in 10 years into a marriage, even at that. But you've watched, you've grown, you've built, you said, okay, now I'm ready to explore. Let's revisit that list because I feel more in tune with you. So I want to try these things. So every 3 to 6 months, visit your sex bucket list, create it, have fun with it.
I've never heard that terminology, and I love that terminology. I think my one of my last questions that I want to ask, as we're kind of winding down this episode, is particularly to go back specifically to, what, kind of the differing parties. And so, like, let's say, as you're having these open dialogues about fantasies, about toys, about, different positions or different things you want to try, one person's into it, one person is not. At what point in a relationship does is a lack of communication or a lack of sexual chemistry kind of a sign for a person to kind of, see their way out of that relationship and find a healthier relationship, like stuff like that?
That comes with just knowing who you're with, honestly. Because I will say that, like, after each of our children, my sex drive kind of just went up and down. I didn't know my husband longer than 2 years before our first child together. And so he really didn't know me. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm in my early 20s and you are talking about, you haven't said anything about sex in the last, 6 months. What's going on? Without me being able to communicate that, hey, I have this, I'm stressed. And I will say that sex is definitely on the back burner. We have 2 kids that are like 3 and 4. We just had this newborn. I need you to bring it up to me more because I won't bring it up because I'm super busy. So me being able to communicate to him in that moment, that was, way back when we first got together.
Sure.
Being able to communicate that early on, then him bringing it back up. All right, I get tired of kind of initiating all the time because I done got used to that at that point. So it's like, okay, yeah, I do have to realize that the kids are a little bit older. Now I have to get myself back into a mode of, it's not all on you to just initiate. It is my job as well. But him not being able to communicate that back to me could have put us in a place where he just gets super frustrated and stop asking or wanting to have sex. Me never getting into the mode of, hey, sex is a huge part. Let me get back into this. And potentially he could have stepped out or just said, to heck with this. So there are all kinds of things just in those small pieces of communication. And I will say that with most women, especially after childbirth, we give this assumption of what men know. And that's with many things. A man who just got a promotion at work, we get this assumption that she should just know I'm stressed. That's why I haven't engaged in any type of intimacy or sexual activities. Being able to say that out of our mouths, pretend that they don't know anything at all. Hey, I just got, I got the promotion at work. But let me tell you, it's come with longer hours. It's come with a lot on my mind. And I know I haven't been as engageful with you as I like. Is it okay if you just, pursue me a little bit because I need you? I just don't always have the forethought to pursue you right now because I'm super stressed. That's an easy conversation to have. And it's a necessary conversation to have no matter how far into the relationship you are.
I know you specialize particularly in women as well as couples, but one of the things too that as a man, I know I don't always know how to articulate what I'm feeling or how to communicate what is going on in my head. The last question I have for you before we jump into social media Are there any like practical tools that you can offer any male listeners that may be facing issues like that in a relationship or in a marriage that can make it easier for communication?
Honestly, I do have some occasional life coaching male clients. I will say that.
Okay.
But I like to approach it with bringing the guard down, taking off the defensive listening ears. That's the first thing of help. And just saying to your partner before you start to speak, I may not be using the right words, so I'm going to say this, and I hope I get my point across appropriately. Being able to preface the conversation with that will help her receive that a little bit differently than if you just said what you were going to say. Because now I have to assume what you meant. So you can also say that, can you tell me what you thought I said? That's huge, because I have been in sessions with a couple and I said, what did he just say? And what that woman said out of her mouth was nowhere close to what he said. I was like, that is not what he said. Now, in that moment, I may say, hey, this is maybe how you should say it. So it's easier for me to hear what's being said, to give them that different approach, so that the other party that's listening can take off their defensive ears, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I just want to stress this one more time. Thank you so much for, spending an entire hour specifically talking about the importance of communication, because I think sometimes communication really kind of gets left out of the conversation when you're talking about specifically sex and things like consent and expectations and even feelings and intimacy. Those are all left out of the conversation because communication's not on the table.
Absolutely. And I can appreciate this entire conversation so much. And I love that you're talking about it. Sex and mental health are best friends, hand in hand. Communication is the glue that weaves it all together.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned earlier about having a book. What's the book about? Where can people find it? Where can they read it?
So it's called I always have to look at the title, 5 Characteristics of a Stimulating Relationship. So it's on Amazon. It's a short read. And this is the title. It's really short read. It's literally less than 60 pages, I think. Nice. And it's just 5 things that you can do to stimulate any relationship. Yes, the romantic one, but if you practice those 5 things, you can stimulate any relationship. And it starts with yourself. And everything I say is yourself.
All right. Well, where can people find you online? Where can people maybe reach out if they're interested in pursuing your services as well?
Absolutely. So I am on all social media platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, all that good stuff. If you search Coach K 101, which is COACHKAY 101, you can also just visit the website loveandintimacy101.com. But if you find me on social media, you reach out to me, I do respond back.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Coach K. We'll provide links for all of her stuff in the show notes, including links to the book as well. That is going to do it for us on this episode. But Chief, you guys can reach out to us at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get access to more podcasts like this, movie reviews, and of course, most importantly, our mental health resource library.